G'day. Hello. Informed Dissent channel. Back with another one. Sorry folks, it's another off the top of my head ramble. Look at the state of that cup. Shocking. But you know, it's flavour. Okay. I'm going to take that from the top. Greetings, folks. Black Eye back with another dispatch. Today, I wanted to talk to everybody about self-defense and quote-unquote violence. Now, I've been a martial arts instructor since 2003. I'm not actively teaching at the moment, although if anyone wants to learn, I'm always keen to teach. But yeah, I've been involved for a number of years. I've studied a number of martial arts. Look, I started out as a hippie, practically. And what's sticking out at the moment to me is that in this country in particular, we have a bizarre attitude towards physical conflict, especially as it pertains to self-defense. And this is kind of a response to some videos I've seen. Look, let me start out by saying any decent martial arts instructor will tell you, if you can't talk your way out, walk. If you can't walk, run. If you can't run, fight. In that order. Conflict is to be avoided. Let me be plain about that. I'm not advocating for violence or vigilantism when I say these things. But on the other hand, this is sort of directed at the people in my own community. When we signed the instructors, or even just signing up as a student, I'm pretty sure, at least in my day, that you agree on paper to use the art for self-development, self-defense, and defense of the weak. Yet, there seems to be a lot of aversion to talking about the consequences of that. And I think this is dangerous, to be honest. We're teaching people the art of death, okay? Like, teaching someone how to strike an opponent is teaching them how to kill, ultimately, and that may be the result. Now, after I completed the instructor's course, I worked in Sydney's nightlife. I have nearly a decade of experience working in fairly rough venues, strip clubs mostly. And let me tell you, you see a lot of shit, and I had plenty of opportunities to actually use my skills. I wasn't a security guard, but I was staff in the venue, and when things happen, whoever's on the spot has to deal with it. But I find this aversion to actually talking about what it is. Like, in the Japanese arts, you've got your do schools, like kendo, judo, which is the self-development version of the art, which is just practicing it for its own perfection. But then you also have the jutsu, the arts of war. Kenjutsu, how to kill somebody with a sword. Jujitsu, how to kill your enemy with your bare hands. That is what these things are. And even if we teach all these things, when it comes time for somebody to use the arts that we have instilled in them, death is a possible consequence for the person, for the opponent, and for innocent bystanders, because fights in the modern world are pretty fucking ugly. The concept of honor is just about dead, and you might handily beat somebody who deserved it, only to find 20 of his friends ready to kick your teeth in the most unsportsmanlike version of combat. And I found, even just trying to bring the topic up. Now, some of the instructors in our groups, they're former police and whatnot. It's like you know the consequences of this stuff, And a stark contrast to American martial arts or firearms information videos, where there seems to be a tacit understanding over there that we are avoiding in a very unhealthy manner. I had a comment suppressed on a Wing Chun channel just because I mentioned the samurai and their view on death. I believe I didn't get an explicit explanation from Sifu over there. I'm not really looking for one. The thing is, if it comes time for something to happen, death is a possible consequence. It might not be directly from your blow. Sydney's lockout laws came into effect because two guys hit the pavement in a fight. The pavement killed them in both instances. That's pretty scary to think that you could go to jail for murder just for a fist fight. But it's a possibility. And it's not instilled in the instructors or the students. In my experience, there's two camps. There are some complete meatheads. And then there are people who are basically in the door path. Oh, we're just practicing the art. We just want to be good at internal Wing Chun or Tai Chi or whatever it is. The self-defense applications are a distant component. And I say that's highly irresponsible. Highly irresponsible. Say you've instilled a false sense of confidence in a young student, and they find themselves in a situation that they think they have to resort to hands to get out of. If you haven't made them think about the possible consequences, you're indirectly responsible for them getting hurt. I don't mean in a legal sense. But I gotta tell you, if I falsely instill one of my students with a sense of false confidence that got them into trouble, I'd feel pretty bloody bad about it, and I think anyone should. The seriousness of martial arts is there for a reason. Human life is precious. Which is why it's not just the American Constitution that recognizes this, but under the United Nations, you have a right to self-defense, and that includes lethal force when required. The aggressor has made their life forfeit. As a libertarian, we call this the non-aggression principle. You do not aggress upon peaceful persons. I don't even like to use the word violence. It's anthropomorphic. The attacker is violent, maybe, but defending your own life, that's a natural response. It might look violent, but to be honest, I think that's a fairly feminized way of viewing it. The appropriate use of force. I always call it the appropriate use of force. In self-defense in particular, but not even in self-defense. The appropriate use of force is never a crime. I like to tell people. You've got your own boundaries, your property, your person. You're allowed to defend these things. Your family, your friends, and the weak. If we can't defend the weak, what kind of society are we living in? But people in this country are afraid of the concept. And you can tell. You can really tell. It has deep psychological consequences for a society to be this conflict averse. We live in a violent world, in case anybody hadn't noticed. We live in this very protected bubble in our Western cities from what life is actually like here on planet Earth. Our grandparents knew, and I think that realization will come knocking. Unfortunately, because Well, one of the consequences of this aversion to thinking about the seriousness of the consequences of aggressive interactions is that our leaders no longer have a good grasp of these things. But our enemies do. You can find footage fairly easily on YouTube about what the enemy states are instilling in their kids. I'm sure most of you have seen the viral video of Chinese school children stripping 9mm weapons in class. It's like Full Metal Jacket for kids. Now, I don't know if that's standard procedure over there, but the rest of humanity has a much more realistic picture when it comes to violence, self-defense, aggression, military disputes. And our ignorance, and it is ignorance in the literal sense of we are ignoring the facts. And that's going to come back on us. Our leaders talk like they don't understand the consequences. And they're getting a smackdown for it. But as things go, they'll be protected and the taxpayers will pay the consequences. I don't care what the pathology behind this is. I mean, let's be honest, it's pretty obvious what's happened. We're led by people who don't have an innate sense of nature, the nature of man. It was made most particularly clear in the statements made through the last couple of years of shutdown by certain prominent political leaders. The tone they take. The snide, holier than thou, we're going to squeeze you and you're not going to do anything attitude. Particularly Canadian and New Zealand leadership, but it was pretty rife. A lot of the governors at the state level in the United States and the premiers in this country had the same sort of smug attitude. But it bred violence. It bred violence because you're violating those people's rights as if violence wouldn't be a consequence. But it was. It absolutely was. I mean, I thought Trudeau was a boxer. He should have some innate sense of the back and forth of aggression. But no, there was this, you do as you're told or your rights will forfeit crap attitude that stems from this avoidance of consequence. Hasn't anybody seen Star Wars? It's like second line uttered by Princess Leia. The tighter you squeeze, the more shit slips through your fingers. We know this deep in our human psyche. We know these things for facts, but we avoid them because they're uncomfortable. And we're comfort addicts in the West. To the point where I bring these topics up and people think I'm advocating for violence, vigilantism, going out looking for fights. None of that is true. None of that is true. I just want people to be more aware of the consequences, where it's almost like something discussed in hushed tones by the sifus behind doors, and the students should just work on their skills. This is a crazy attitude, as far as I'm concerned. This is a crazy attitude. And it's so backward and Victorian era. It's classist. Violence is for the oiks. We don't talk about that here in these nice suburbs. Well, what keeps those suburbs nice? Men willing to do aggressive things around the periphery. we're never going to get past this. Okay, we might make it more removed. You know, one of the biggest parts of my awakening was the drone campaigns. There's blowback from that. And little Susie down in Las Vegas, sitting at a computer terminal, blowing away brown kids, doesn't deal with the consequences of her violence. But other people do. It's kind of like the way the conspiracy theorists talk about the elite palming off their karma. But you can't. You put noise in the system, then there's noise in the system. And it's going to keep banging away until something breaks or something's fixed. Just because you do it in a sterile manner does not mean it's not horrifically aggressive to extinguish another life, and that the people connected to that life won't seek vengeance. And it all comes back to not wanting to face the facts. It's not wanting to sully your mind with the thought of the consequences of your political position. I think that's practically unforgivable. Everything's at a remove. Every taxpayer in the West is responsible for what's happening in Gaza, in Ukraine, in Yemen, Somalia. Take your pick, wherever there's resources. And as long as people avoid this fundamental underlying issue about when the use of force is appropriate, when it's domination, and when it's aggression, I think we clear a lot of this up. This might be why it's so taboo. Sorry if this isn't very coherent, but I've found this to be deeply, deeply troubling, particularly as a martial arts instructor, but just as someone who's observing societal trends. And, you know, one thing that occurred to me is we've made young boys so soft that now, instead of sorting it out with their fists, someone waits until they're scared and pulls a fucking knife. Is that an improvement? Now, if these boys were a little more seasoned to how the world is, then I don't think we would see this. You know, in general, violence has gone down, but the violence we do have now seems to be more acute and final for all our attempts to sterilize society. You know, it seems like getting stabbed is a step back from getting a black eye or even a broken arm. So I hope I made you all a little bit uncomfortable today. Because a little discomfort now can spare an agony later. This is a lesson that we in the West have forgotten. And it's only the self-improvement guru dickhead types who are preaching this. But it's an inescapable fact of being a mortal being on this plane of existence. So you do well to confront these things, because they won't go away. They'll just bite you in the ass. That's my rant for today on this topic. Thank you for hearing me out, and I hope you did hear me out. Yeah. Things are moving along. Teaching myself some new skills. I've got some art projects to show off in the near future. Been 3D printing and doing some 3D design, teaching myself Blender. When the economy collapses, you're still going to need a fat stack of skills. So work on your skills more than your bills. It's more important. The money's being watered down so fast, the collapse is almost here. I can hear it. Can't you hear it? Doesn't it sound like that final scene in Titanic when the ship is rending? Hear that steel twisting and tearing? I hear that constantly. That's the sound of the Ponzi scheme being over. So prepare yourselves. Wear your SPF 50,000. The sun's going bananas lately. And Earth's magnetic field is weakening. That's NASA data. That's from the NOAA. So unless they're lying to all the global shipping companies, you should probably take heed. When things collapse, it'd be better for all concerned if we all have a good understanding of consequence of aggression. And we don't have this, frankly, grandma attitude that we don't want to consider about it. Because let's face it, your grandma was tougher than you boys. Okay? They came from a real world. They watched their brothers and their lovers come home in pine boxes from foreign conflicts in a way that we can't even grasp anymore. We're too protected, and we need to avoid being blind on these issues, or we'll be easily led. We don't want to end up like that generation that's now in the ground in Ukraine because we didn't understand when our leaders push for these things, what the consequences are. Always think about the consequences. You know? People have called me an extremist. Well, I am an extremist. I'm an extremist futurist, which means I think about the consequences and I run the tape forward to its logical conclusion. You know? If this is the categorical imperative, what does the world look like in 2 years, 10, 20? It's important. It's the most important. It's the most important because the world has never been more unstable, and individual human beings have never been more empowered to push that stability one way or the other. Yeah, I'm just going to fade off into ranting now. So, I'll call it there. Stay tuned. New things brewing. First episode of my book series will be coming out probably this week, depending. I just took on a new art gig, so the schedule is a bit full. But I'll, as usual, promise to be more regular and break that promise. But I thank you all for listening. Black Guy out. Peace, love, and kung fu. See you all in the next one.